you've never eaten like this before. You've never drank like this before. You've never surfed like this before. And this is the way here. It's the flavor. It's our song. It's like it happens in everything we do. Maybe it's a complex. Maybe we're little and we feel big. I don't know what it is. That's the way it rolls here.
Welcome to the Water People podcast, where we talk story with some of the most adept and interesting water people on the planet. I'm your host, Lauren Hill, joined by my partner, Dave Rastovich. For us, this is a place to exchange not just ideas and practices, but stories, experiential knowledge gleaned from the aquatic adventures that shape us. We acknowledge the Bundjalung Nation, the traditional custodians of the land and waters where we work and play, who have cared for this sea country for tens of thousands of years. Respect and gratitude to all First Nations people, including elders past, present, and emerging. Let's raise a glass to something bigger than just great beer. Meet Stone and Wood, a brewery that thinks big and acts small. Today, we're in conversation with Puerto Rican tube connoisseur Otto Flores. After many national titles and a spell on the World Qualifying Series, Otto veered away from competitive surfing and toward perfect waves of consequence, a decision that landed him on the covers of all the mainstream surf mags through the early 2000s. Today, Otto lives with his family on his home island, the gorgeous, tropical, Spanish-speaking American Commonwealth, located about 1,000 miles southeast of Miami, Florida, where he's held in the highest regard for both his community-minded spirit and commitment to protecting Puerto Rico's coastlines. In 2017, Otto led a team with Waves for Water in the aftermath of Hurricanes Irma and Maria, helping to set a course for recovery with an emphasis on sustainability. More recently, Otto was instrumental in working with Save the Waves Coalition to secure 8 kilometers of Puerto Rico's northwest as its 11th recognized World Surf Reserve. The World Surfing Reserves is a program of Save the Waves Coalition, a nonprofit focused exclusively on the conservation of surfing coastlines on an international scale. We caught up with Otto to talk about stepping into leadership and the juggle of carrying many responsibilities while managing an abundant, watery life. Isla del Encanto. You got to visit the island recently, Puerto Rico. Can you set the scene for us, Davey?
Sure, Lauren. We were all there at a time where you all dodged a hurricane that was heading towards your hometown of St. Augustine in Florida.
Milton?
Hurricane Milton, coming from the Gulf of Mexico. And I was already on the island because we were finishing up a surfing project called the Electric Acid Surfboard Test. And so I was there to meet another hurricane's energy, which was coming from Hurricane Kirk in the Atlantic. Old Captain Kirk.
Apropos for you, Trekkie one?
Yes, that's true, of course. There was Star Trek energy there for sure. But anyway, I was on the island for 5 days before yourself and Minnow evacuated from Florida.
We were in Florida visiting my mom and my stepmom and spending some rare family time there. It's really far to get there from where we live in Australia. So we'd been looking forward to being there for quite a few months. And then we get there and a few days in, 6 days in or so, you jump to meet a swell. Minnow and I stay behind to spend time with family, and then we're faced with a Cat 5 hurricane, and we decided to get family safe and then evacuate ourselves down to meet up with you in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, and so when you all arrived, I couldn't imagine being more fried by the sun, more surf stoned, and that means like complete wave brain happening where you've been looking into the eye of spinning waves so much that when you close your eyes, all you see is that beautiful blue vortex in both eyeballs. And that's a cherished state to be in for all of us who know it and feel it.
There was a lot of talk. You've been filming on this project for like 8 months, not straight,
but
on and off. Yeah. And there was a lot of talk about where the series, so it's a series of 4 episodes in partnership with Stab. You have to be a subscriber to watch, but all of those episodes are now available online. And there's a lot of talk about where you'd wrap up the final decision making in the project. Can you run us through what it is and why you went there to finish the project?
Yeah, basically the idea is that 11 shapers from around the world shape a surfboard with me in mind, and then I go and sort of blind test those boards. I don't know who the shapers are and what their thoughts were with the shape of surfboards that they make, but essentially I ride each of those boards and whittle it down to one that I'd like to keep, and that is dubbed the winner, though I don't like using that word because all of the boards are not like based on a winning and losing feeling. They're just different feelings. So anyway, it's been a really fun project and I've learned a lot. It's been really humbling and super duper fun. And what we got to was a point where there was, say, the final 4 top surfboards. And the idea was to just go somewhere and ride some different waves than what we'd been riding around home throughout the surf season at home. And because we were going to do this family trip to Florida, which happens every couple of years, and we usually time that for the seasons, as we all do being water people, you don't want to leave home when the waves are pumping and the conditions are your favourite perhaps. And so we wait for that back half of the year to go to Florida traditionally, because that's also when hurricane surf can happen in Florida. When we left, there was a cloud of Sahara dust over the Atlantic coming over Cape Verde Islands, moving towards the Caribbean, which was inhibiting the formation of hurricanes. So I guess the dryness in the air was not letting that water enter the sky and pool up into these tropical storms.
It has been a remarkably slow season.
Yeah, so that was happening all season. But then right before we left Australia to go to family in Florida, that dissipated. And so there was this perspective that the hurricanes are about to ramp up again just in time for the season to end, really, and it starts to become too cool for them to grow. And so with that in mind, we threw 4 of these surfboards in a bag and lugged them over there. And I thought, yep, I reckon by the time we get there could be some activity. Sure enough, a couple of days into being in Florida, they all brewed up in the Atlantic. And I jumped down there with the lovely Otto Flores. And, you know, he's a central character in the surfing fabric of Puerto Rico, and we'd met on and off over the years. He was always in Hawaii during the winter time when big swells would hit Pipeline, and he was a great surfer there and a great tube rider, and we had a lot of mutual friends, and so we were aware of each other and had hangouts at friends' houses in Hawaii. And so the invitation's always there when you have those encounters with friends, don't you think? It's like, oh hey, when you come to Oz, make sure you reach out, I'd love to look after you. And it's so fun showing people where you live, and he was always that way about Puerto Rico. And I'd been there 20 years before as a grommet and loved it. So it was just so great to go back. And then because we were surfing together and surfing together alone with nobody else, we really got to dive into a lot of great conversations, a lot of great moments of just awe and wonder. And it's so nice to be with fellow surfers where in between waves you're looking up and noting the texture of the sky and just the colour, the sound, the smells, the general feeling of where we are at that moment, often with a lot of very technical sort of high-performance minded surfers and surfing, we can kind of be overly focused on our physical ambitions, the idea of riding the deepest tube, jumping the highest in the air, the fastest turn, all this sort of thing. And though I was there to test these surfboards and pick my favourite one, mostly we were just trading off our gratitudes. Oh, how good does it feel to just be cooked by the sun right now? Oh, what do you reckon? Does that tree have a lot of coconuts? We can reach them. Let's go get them when the storm comes. And every day at midday, there'd be this big tropical thunderhead of a cloud that would come from the mountains and blow out the surf for a minute, long enough for us to go to shore and pick some coconuts and rehydrate, and then watch the wind flick back offshore, and then back into the water we'd go for more hours of play. And anyway, it just was such a beautiful time. And because of all of that time, it was so obvious that we needed to have a chat, a water people chat with Otto. And we needed to hand him that microphone and learn from him, because I feel like so much of Otto's story is about skill sharing. Skill sharing and how to navigate risk and reward, skill sharing on parenting, skill sharing on how to be a good host and just a lovely, loving person. It just felt like a no-brainer and such a privilege, and also such a confirmation that it is actually a culture that we belong to, this coastal culture. Like, it is a living organism. It does feel amazing to close your eyes and imagine going to the other side of the planet, and when you land on this tiny little island in a different ocean, you'll be welcomed like a family member. That's really special. And to feel that excitement in your own bones at reciprocating that for them when they came here, it's just great. That's something to really celebrate. And I think it's a beautiful part of our surfing organism.
We always begin the podcast in the same way, by asking about a time or experience after which you were never the same. Do you have a story like that you'd be willing to share with us today?
Yeah, I was talking to Maceo. I was relaying this to Maceo today. I remember when I was 8 or 9 years old, I remember my cousin, his name was Pau. He let me borrow this Scott X15 bodyboard that had a handle on it and it had 2 fins. And I remember we used to stand up on our bodyboards. We didn't have surfboards. And I remember I put my foot in the handle and controlled the bodyboard like while I was kind of surfing on it. And when I got the feeling of control, I used to be like a cyclist and like BMX kid and just into everything. And as soon as I did that and kind of was able to angle into a closeout barrel, my whole life changed. Like I was obsessed with surfing from then on. And to this day, that was the turning moment for me, like just bottom turning into a closeout barrel with fins and a handle on a bodyboard. It was my mind saying, let's do this. And I did it. And I was like, oh, wow, that's what surfing's all about. I haven't looked back ever since, to be honest.
Wow. So to be clear, was your front foot in the handle or was there a back foot in the handle?
My front foot, which is the most awkward thing ever.
So that means your stance was as wide as it could possibly be.
Well, yeah, because the bodyboard, I mean, it wasn't on the nose, so my toes were still hanging in the bodyboard because the handle was a little bit back.
Yeah.
But I remember like putting my toes up and controlling the bottom turn, and that was it. Like I was like, awesome. Wow, this is what surfing is, right? Like you can control where you go, like where your mind says, yeah, it came natural. And I swear to God, like I had beautiful bicycles, and I used to be like a very avid, like little mountain biker and BMXer, and everything just disappeared. And then the surfboards came and it was over. It was over. Game over.
So great.
Did you have people around you, Otto, who modeled being a water person or surfing? Was surfing a rich part of the culture around you?
So I was raised in the suburb called Ocean Park, which is in town here in San Juan. And there was a huge counterculture. There was a bunch of ripping surfers that were from there. And my memories of like coconut surf wax and girls on the beach and the guys with like the thrusters and the squash tails and, like late 80s coming into the 90s, that's when I really started surfing, were the coolest thing that I could ever. And, there was hot girls, pretty girls and cool guys. And it was like the thing, right? The surfer crew. There was really good surfers already. There's a guy here named Rafi Lumpart who's friends with Kelly, and Kelly used to come around Puerto Rico when we were young, and there was a full-on scene of surfers, and they traveled internationally. And Puerto Rico since the 60s has been crowning surfers and champions. I think Nat Young came here, David Nueva in 1968 for this world contest. So there's a rich culture of surfing here, and I remember vividly living on the strip where all the cool cats lived, and it was a bit of a North Shore scene of Puerto Rico condensed like right in a beach town. And it was unforgettable. I have this vivid memory of like, this is kind of cheesy, coconut sex wax and Duran Duran, the Reflex. And that was stuff that inspired me back then to just go out and get a rip on.
That's so cool.
I remember we interviewed Pauline Menser about her book. And in her book, she writes about how the biggest contest she ever went to was I think it was the World Junior Championships in Puerto Rico. That would have been the late 80s, early 90s?
Mm-hmm. 1988, and sorry for interrupting.
No, please.
We had the world surfing titles at Surfers Beach, and I think Chris Brown came down. He won the juniors. Fabio Gubea was here. Aquila Aipa was part of the team. Ben Aipa was one of the coaches, and I was 12 years old, and my mom took me there. And when I saw that, and then all the boys like Rafi Lampard and all the best surfers of Puerto Rico were in the team. And that was like mind boggling because that was my first experience with competitive surfing. And, we're a little island in the Caribbean, but we've been involved. Our surfing federation's been really active, but those were clutch moments. And it was funny because I'm from town, I'm from the city. And when I went over there, it was like I was going to this paradise. It was like going to Indo in my own island. You know, my young surfing days were pretty dreamy because, as you guys know, the waves here are kind of all right. And then when I showed up to these surf spots where they were offshore, when the trades were blowing and seeing these magic, you know, emerald perfect rights just breaking, it definitely left a mark. And yeah, there was a lot of really cool guys that really helped me when I was a kid. And they were the best surfers in the island. And they kind of took me under their wing and showed me the ropes. And yeah, it was a good childhood. It was awesome to grow up surfing in this island for sure.
Otto, I remember when we were hanging out, you talking about the history between Puerto Rico and Hawaii, and how there's a lot of Hawaiians with Puerto Rican blood. And I really felt like, you know, there is this sort of underlying feeling of Hawaiian surf culture and ocean water person culture there in Puerto Rico. When you were a grommet and say that older generation that you keep talking about that took you under their wing, did they have a similar influence from Hawaii as Southern Californians and Australians had, where we were just so enamored by Hawaiians and the ability of Hawaiian water people and the history there? You know, you look at California and people went as far as adopting the ukulele and the woven palm frond hats and aloha shirts, and just wanted to just feel like they were there, even though they were back in California or Australia. Was Puerto Rico the same?
That's a really interesting conversation. There is definitely that island vibe. And one thing I do have to say is that we've always looked up to the Hawaiians. I think the boards, the culture, everything really came from Hawaii. There was these boards, the Barnfield boards, Willis Brothers, and all these, like, you know, 90s, like really island classics. And there used to be a surf shop that still lives to this day called Playero. And they brought like the best of the best product. And a lot of the surfboards were from Hawaii. So we've always looked up to them. But the funny part about, you know, when you mentioned the ukulele, there is a similar guitar in the Latin culture called el cuatro. And el cuatro is basically a ukulele in a Latin form. And if you actually listen to Buena Vista Social Club and take the voices out of it, you're going to feel that ukulele and that Latin like flair on this little guitar, which there is no synergy. I don't think there's any correlation. Maybe there is. Maybe a Portuguese guy brought it to Hawaii. I have no clue. But there's very similar sounds in the island cultures. And there's this underlying synergy that I think it's kind of quiet, but it's there, you know. And I think you probably felt it when you were here roaming around all these coves and all these beaches. There's also that volcanic, like, you know, culture. All our waves break off of volcanic rock. We're actually the top of a volcano. So maybe there's these underlying similarities that create a very similar culture. But yeah, I mean, the fishermen here are incredible water people. And because of the fishermen here is why I know so much about the ocean and the weather and all that. And there is people that are really connected to the ocean in their own way. And to answer your question, we've always looked up to Hawaiians, but I think we have the playground here that's very similar to that. So I think naturally people have gravitated to become water people and water men, water women, all on their own as well.
That's so great. It makes me think of a recent discussion I heard with Jamie Brisick and Brian Carolina. And Brian was saying how much he learnt from Australian life-saving movements in terms of practices of rescue and dealing with, you know, a situation where you're rescuing someone near the shoreline. But then he was saying how it's so fascinating because he looks to Australia and learns a lot from our history of doing that. But then Australia actually learnt it from Duke Kahanamoku, who came and brought paddle boards and all kinds of things related to the surf line. And so there's this back and forth that just keeps happening. And it seems like a very similar thing with your home island and Hawaii, which is really neat.
Yeah. And as you know, one of my missions is to bring a bit of that water safety aspect to Puerto Rico. We have no lifeguarding system here. We pretty much have to develop a culture of surf responders. And we're the guys that are taking care of ourselves. And, you know, there's heavy water here. There's heavy waves. I've taken it upon myself, thanks to the guys at Bragg and Patagonia to create a culture of surf responders that help themselves when we're in trouble in the water. And it's us that are responsible for our peers in the lineup. And, it's matured enough to the way where there's water safety programs like Rincon Water Safety that has come out of it. And also, like, I'd say a huge percentage of the lineup that surfs waves of consequence, they're all certified and have all taken Bragg not only once, but several times. So it's really cool to see the interest of that and knowing that people, obviously we see people pass away, we see, drownings and all that. And whatever we could do to mitigate that a little bit is been really enlightening. And I myself have been trained by the Hawaiians for years, with the jet skis and also that. And I just felt it was a good opportunity to bring it back home, bring it to the community and show everybody. And what Brian Kailana teaches us is the knowledge should be shared with everybody. So whatever we know, we just share it with our peers and even people that don't come to the class. We always teach them hand signals. We always teach them, the little nuances that could help mitigate risk or mitigate a life or, and we ask the right questions. We ask like, hey, do you know where the nearest hospital is? Do you know this and that? And usually a crew, when there's heavy water or we're surfing heavy waves, we have that little conversation. And it stems from those systems that have been developed in Australia, Hawaii, and now we're spreading all around the world.
Can you explain what Bragg is for listeners who don't understand that that's actually an acronym?
Yeah, Bragg is the Big Wave Assessment Group, and it was created after the death of Sion Malowski in Mavericks. Sion was a good friend of my wife and I. Susie, widowed Zion, was a very good friend of our crew, and it just hit the surf community. And I've never considered myself as a big wave surfer, but I did always indulge in good waves and waves of consequence. So it just felt natural for me. And obviously having that friendship and that bond with Sion was something that made me feel responsible. And I think Cole, Danilo Kuto, and all the crew, Mark Healy, that developed that in Hawaii, just have been spreading that word little by little. And people shouldn't be scared about the Big Wave Assessment Group. It's actually for everybody. Moms should take it. Kids should take it. And it's actually people that could respond when a situation happens. I've done 2 rescues with my 13-year-old son, who's been to Bragg twice. And it's pretty miraculous to see how he can react to a situation that, a 16-year-old just freezes, So just having the knowledge can help mitigate some risk or even save a life.
And the willingness to take responsibility is really interesting to me. We're at this point in surf culture where more and more people are in the lineup who maybe haven't grown up with the culture of surfing, with the etiquette of surfing. And so we're at this sort of tipping point where I feel like either things are just going to go full-blown chaos, which I guess it kind of is right now, especially at our more crowded Point Break lineups, or we need people to step up and take responsibility for sharing not only, the rescue side of things, but also like the day-to-day etiquette call-outs that I feel like people like you probably already take responsibility for. But I think as a culture, we need to have these conversations around like, okay, we shouldn't be outsourcing this responsibility. We shouldn't be like, for example, here in Byron, there was a local council member who wanted to create a law to make it mandatory to wear leashes at the lineups in town, which is interesting and has its own validity. But also, like, for me, the deeper question is, do we want people from the outside coming into lineups and telling us what we should and shouldn't be doing? Or should we be regulating, taking a page out of the old book, enforcing what the rules should be in appropriate ways at our own individual lineups? What's your take on the state of etiquette?
Well, I think it's our responsibility to be stewards of our lifestyle and what we practice. And I think in good faith and by doing these movements or by doing these initiatives or taking these systems and implementing it with the core crew, it just always bleeds into the general public. And what happens is that if you voice that out in a positive way and also let people know that there's risk involved every time we're out there, right? But if we create like an etiquette system and voice it out the right way. Sometimes, there's people that need to be told like, hey, you don't know what you're doing. Let's help you out. I think more and more what people are doing is like, hey, this is the way things are done, or hey, at your level you shouldn't be out here. And you know what? Funny that you say that. I've traveled quite fairly during my life, and I've never seen the crowds of inexperienced people as I've seen in the last couple of years. I'm talking about Hawaii. I'm talking about Indo. I'm talking about people that are in the lineups doing things that are totally against what we've been learning for years. And the results are pretty evident. They get really hurt. I think it's a matter of like, just having a good community conversation. And I think one thing that's really helping and that we're establishing here is that there's signage at the beach. And it's signage just saying like, hey, there's a current here, or these are kind of like not the rules, but things you should follow. And what's sadly but true, what happens here is, we have a rich festive culture, and people drink in the ocean and they end up like floating away, and you have to save them, and then they actually risk the life of the people they're saving. And those are the things that we have to start clearing up. And like, you know what, there's a current here, you shouldn't be swimming, and obviously you shouldn't be swimming with a drink in your hand. So it's a touchy subject, and I think that is our responsibility as surf responders and as part of that community that shares that playground, to kind of just say and establish these, I wouldn't say rules, but these things that work, these little systems that work, and try to do it in a positive light and a good conversation, if possible.
Yeah, great. I totally agree. And it just makes me think of how great it would be in our town to do such a thing. Even though we don't have like big waves, we have big risks. Like we have a main point break in the town where we live that's a real learner wave, but there are times where it's really shallow. Usually it's really shallow, and the waves can be really hollow, and people get pitched really easily onto the sand and stuff. But also just skill levels. There's a lot of cluelessness about how to navigate a crowded lineup, and also that in Australia, like the older generations picking up surfing is just booming, and my mum's part of that group, and it's amazing. Though at the same time, and it's probably like what you're speaking about in Indo and around the world, we're seeing a lot of people from their 30s and older getting into surfing and expecting it to be this really quick learning curve and this right to be able to go wherever and whenever they want in the water, because it's the freedom of the idea of surfing and stuff. But a lot of danger pops up because of that. It would be a really helpful thing here in Oz for a lot of those new surfers. They have the age, the wisdom of age to actually understand the need for this kind of understanding and how to come into something that already exists but's really dynamic, and how to do it properly, because it can feel like a bit of an exclusive club, like when people paddle into a lineup and they're kind of clueless, and the locals and everyone who are switched on are just giving them the cold shoulder and stuff. It'd be nicer if we were able to bring them in and go, hey, you're welcome, though maybe the shoulder's a bit of a better place for you than impact zone.
This is the niche that I think is really missing in communication. I don't know if it's necessarily should be part of brag or something separate, but like just how to approach people in a non-confrontational way and just suggest something safer. This happens every time I surf at the pass. Now I see it and I feel like I have to say something like, okay, you're sitting in the impact zone. That's going to be really hard for you. Maybe you should try the inside. And sometimes people take that really personally, but maybe there's a way to teach people how to go about that in a gentle way.
I think that the surf coaches in the surf school should have that as part of their program. Like I think that, I have a really good friend here in Puerto Rico, Ramsey Morales, and he has a surf school, and he gives you a brief for about 15 to 20 minutes before you paddle out the first time. He's a surf responder. He's gone through brag. He's a jet ski operator. And he says, if you don't really like indulge in that conversation for those 20 minutes that he's teaching you lineup etiquette, like where you shouldn't go, what you shouldn't do, then he doesn't feel comfortable, giving you the class. And I think that these surf schools and these surf coaches that are taking these higher end people and these older people to surf, that should be a part of the brief before you surf. And then as you go and as you work with either your coach or your surf school, you kind of can graduate to these levels of waves that your performance level probably differs to. So I think it's got to start from those surf schools and from those surf coaches that are giving you that first try and that first for me. And I know that sometimes people jump the gun and they just rent a board and paddle out. And the guys that rents you the board needs to tell you, hey, these are dangerous things that you need to look out for and be a part of your scope when you go surfing.
Yeah, agreed.
In 2017, Otto, you worked extensively with Waves for Water in the aftermath of Hurricanes Irma and Maria, helping set a course for recovery. I'd love for you to tell us about that work, what you saw, and the impact that clean water can have in disaster situations.
Yeah, it was pretty eye-opening. So Irma was probably the biggest hurricane ever recorded in the history of at least my living life. It broke every scale. It was a category 6. It had over 200 mile an hour winds, and it decimated the Caribbean. And when that happened, as neighbors of the Caribbean, like part of the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico felt like, our neighbors were in need. And through John Rose and Waves for Water and my relationship with John, we kind of reached out, and a good friend of mine, Jorge Quintana, who's a very important part of this community, and my partner in Bragg, he kind of wrote to Waves for Water and said, hey, we kind of want to raise our hand and start doing a chapter and figuring something out. So we assembled a team of surfers and military to go to the Virgin Islands and be responders. 3 days without clean water is very, very dangerous for any hygiene, health, a million purposes. And clean water is the start of resilience. It was really humbling and rewarding to see what a bunch of surfers and a bunch of military guys could do, because we're production experts. We handle situations. We're always looking for waves. We're always solving. When you mix that with, a person that has a military background and is doing the same thing for humanity, incredible things happen. And, Ben Bourgeois was part of that team, Jimmy Wilson, a photographer. There was a bunch of surfers that got together, and we went and responded to St. Croix as a base. And we were going to all the Virgin Islands and training the trainer. What we do is we bring the filters, we bring the buckets. We created a network via Puerto Rico. It starts with like us going to Home Depot and saying, hey, we're going to do this. How many buckets could you give us? And the paint guy. And all of a sudden you just start building these networks with all of your network and solving huge problems that arise. And the scene was pretty incredible. As we were all flying to St. Croix as a team, Maria was brewing in the Atlantic. We all went to the Virgin Islands and started, separating and building teams and training people and training the community to respond to this clean water effort with these filters. And these filters have the capability of giving you, I think, like 10,000 gallons of water per filter. So one bucket and one filter could, feed a family of 4. We built cisterns. We built all these microsystems that at the end of the day would feed a whole community clean water. And you could do it from water catchment. You could do it from dirty water. And the beautiful thing about it is that the system with these filters eliminates disease, and it really opens a very simple way of just living a day to day. While we were in St. Croix, this Maria was brewing. It became a huge storm, and it started targeting St. Croix and Puerto Rico. So at one point I'm looking at myself going, wow, my family's in Puerto Rico. We're going to get hit by a hurricane over there. My wife's from Canada. My kids are young. Like, I've grown up with hurricanes my whole life, but it got pretty tense enough that we were at breakfast one day, and I've never picked up the red phone in my life. And that day I called Puerto Rico and said, I need a helicopter or a plane. I don't know how you get it to me, but I need to go back to Puerto Rico. And at 4:00 that afternoon, there was a turboprop plane funded by Richard Bronson, if I'm not mistaken, from Virgin Airways, that had room for 4 people. I was on my way with a Navy SEAL to Puerto Rico to start a Puerto Rico chapter of what we were already doing in the Virgin Islands. Luckily, I got back to my family. We outfitted 10 homes before the storm hit. We got everybody, all the dogs, everybody into a hotel, and Maria pretty much ran us over. When you walk out of a major hurricane, it's total devastation. You see nature's wounded. You see humanity's wounded. The aftermath of a hurricane is no joke. Luckily, I got to get my family out of Puerto Rico to Canada 4 days after that. And from September 20th to February 8th, Puerto Rico had no power. And my main goal with all our team was to try to get as much water and as much funding as we could to get clean water to those people in need. Our first meeting was with a water company, and the water company told us, if you can help the people that we can't reach, then you would be giving us an incredible hand. So we went out to the mountains. At the end of the day, we raised $1 million and got 70,000 people clean water with this little team of surfers and military guys. Although we did really good, it was really humbling and really inspiring to see what you can do when you just relay a message and give somebody a tool to be resilient. Yeah, after they had clean water, they could live. Their hygiene was better. And I did see Puerto Rico becoming a resilient community. To this day and age, we don't rely on the government for power. We don't rely on the government for a lot of things. I think people here in Puerto Rico are resilient amongst themselves, and generators and water systems and actually survival skills are part of every family in this island. So it's pretty humbling to see, but it's pretty gratifying to see how beautiful the communities get back and how smart they actually become. Microgrids became a thing in Puerto Rico. Luckily, my partner, Jorge Quintana, is the general manager for Tesla. He outfitted hospitals, and he actually got the Tesla job while being at Waves for Water. It was responding to the emergency where all these incredible positions and all these incredible tools are part of our everyday living. And this house that I'm sitting in right now, it's solar powered, and we do water catchment, and we can fend for ourselves because the power goes out a lot here.
Was that a real turning point? Puerto Rico is such an interesting, unique situation as a territory. The U.S. acquired Puerto Rico from Spain in 1898 after the Spanish-American War, and then U.S. citizenship was granted to the island's residents in 1917. And then after World War II, the first large migration to the U.S. started, and now there are more Puerto Ricans living in the U.S. than on the island, if we can believe what we read on the internet. A lot of people who stayed behind on the beautiful island there say that they feel maybe like second-class citizens because they're part of the U.S., but also aren't granted the full rights of being U.S. citizens, including being able to vote in general elections. What's the feeling on the ground in terms of statehood or independence? Like, are there movements in general, one way or the other?
That's an interesting dichotomy. I think political parties, and I'm not going to beat around the bush, corruption are a big part of what we live with in Puerto Rico. We do get federal funding. We have been funded for the past 100 and something years. We are American citizens. And yes, it is true. There's over 5 million Puerto Ricans that have sprouted throughout the United States. But yeah, I think that is one strike to the gut that every Puerto Rican that lives here has, not being able to vote and not having a voice in who's the president of the United States. I myself have been to Congress twice to fight for public land, to protect green spaces, and to really be an advocate for the oceans, for one of our biggest playgrounds, and especially here in Puerto Rico. We have beautiful coastlines. We have incredible ecosystems. I have a passion for mangroves because mangroves are the most resilient thing that ever existed. They protect us from hurricanes. They protect us from, water levels. They keep incredible flora and fauna. They protect a lot of wildlife, and they are a resilient piece of our ecosystem. So there's a lot of my heart into what happens with Puerto Rico's ecosystems. To answer your question directly, there's a bit of a gray area. There's a separation between people that want statehood and then people that want independence. This is the reality. There's too much interest in Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico was 100 and something years ago, 90% self-sufficient. In this day and age, we're 90% relying on anything and everything that gets shipped to this island, including food. And the food system is the biggest thing that we have. That, to me, is where the problem stands the biggest, right? We have 4 growing seasons. We have the potential to be an incredible place. I'm not saying that we have to separate from the United States or where I stand in independence and all that. I believe that there's positives for a lot of the things that are happening in the island. But as a Commonwealth, Puerto Rico doesn't really have a voice. But there's a movement going on right now. And with this political campaign, there is a candidate that is realistically trying to make a change. The coolest thing that I've ever heard on recent conversations is that the reality is that we're not going to change our status overnight. The interest of the United States having Puerto Rico as a state is not like something that's going to happen on the flip of a switch, or it's even real. But we do need a change. We can't still live in this gray area. And what's happened in Puerto Rico for the past, couple of decades is that the parties have been flip-flopping between one or the other, and we just stay in this middle ground where nothing really happens. And to be honest, I think there's a lot of funding that goes the wrong places and a lot of currents that just disappear into maybe corruption or political parties and stuff like that, instead of going into protecting these lands. And the funds are there. The funds are in Congress. I mean, I've sat with people at the White House. I've sat with people in the Department of Interior, with natural resources, I've definitely been in those conversations, but the people that handle that, sadly enough, don't have the capability to manage the funds. And sometimes they go to waste. Yeah, I think we need a change. I think that the youth is probably going to be the culprit of that. I think education is the key. Our politician has stripped us of a lot of educational possibilities, and I think the youth is, these new kids that are actually listening to what, and this might sound cliche, what the earth is saying, what nature is saying, and that nature has a voice, are possibly going to be the people that have a difference. But reiterating all that, it's not going to be a change that's going to happen overnight.
Please stay tuned while we take a quick break to acknowledge the folks who help make our podcast possible. Let's raise a glass to something bigger than just great beer. Meet Stone and Wood, a brewery that thinks big and acts small, right from the heart of Byron Bay. Stone and Wood isn't just about brewing beer, it's about building a community. Certified B Corp and driven by environmental and social responsibility, they're all about making a positive impact one sip at a time. Their philanthropic arm, the Ingrained Foundation, supports local grassroots organizations, channeling funds and volunteer hours straight into the communities they call home, focusing on environmental and social causes close to the heart. Here's to Stone and Wood for crafting exceptional brews and for making a tangible difference in our Northern Rivers community. Patagonia is in business to save our home planet. Founded by Yvonne Chenard in 1973, Patagonia is a surf and outdoor apparel company based in Ventura, California. As a certified B Corp and a founding member of 1% for the Planet, the company is recognized internationally for its product quality and environmental activism, as well as its contributions of nearly $230 million to environmental organizations. Patagonia's unique ownership structure reflects that Earth is its only shareholder. Profits not reinvested back into the business are paid as dividends to protect the planet. Futures makes the first surf fins from recycled fishing nets. Alpha Net Plus is an innovative collaboration between Futures Fins and Borreo, blending carbon and discarded fishing nets. To date, they've transformed more than 35,000 kilos, that's about 77,000 pounds, of discarded fishing nets into new Alpha fins at their headquarters in Huntington Beach, California. Nets that would have otherwise ended up in the ocean. Made for high performance and tested by the best, from our very own Dave Rastovich to friend of the podcast, John Florence, Alpha is available in a wide range of fins for those who want to make a difference with every wave you catch. Learn more at futuresfins.com. The best summer surf seasons go hand in hand with fried eyeballs. Looking perpetually red-eyed might be an indicator of good times, but it also hurts. Good sunnies are non-negotiable, but ours inevitably get jumbled in the beach bag and the lenses get shredded by sand. Child, that's CHILDE, Eco Eyewear reimagines the way we use sunglasses. Instead of tossing out frames because of scratched lenses, the Child for Life program offers free lens replacement up to 12 months from purchase and for a small fee thereafter. Child makes sunnies and prescription glasses from plants, not petrol. It's eyewear that's made to last and able to be repaired for a smaller energy footprint. Let's reimagine the culture of disposability together. Learn more at childeyewear.com. You helped campaign for the designation of the 11th World Surfing Reserve on the northwest coast of Puerto Rico. Can you share a bit about Save the Waves Coalition and the purpose of World Surfing Reserves?
Well, a World Surfing Reserve is a designation, and it's a very symbolic, but it also puts the eyes and a bit of a microphone on what these pieces of land mean to the public. And there's a very magical stretch of coast in the northwest coast of Puerto Rico that holds incredible waves, incredible wildlife. And for the last 20 odd years, it's been threatened by development. Unnecessary development is what I call it. When I got called to be the ambassador of this stewardship council, I really felt it hard because we've been protesting for this land for a long time. And there's a person that really has educated us through the past couple of years. Her name is Kathy Hall, and she's been fighting this fight for over 20 years. And Kathy actually comes from the East Coast of the United States, but fell in love with Puerto Rico and has defended a lot of our natural resources for the right reasons. And she started the Cultural League, which there is a lot of cultural findings. And she found a way to keep these developers from damaging this place. We've lost some fights, and we've definitely, kept our hand in the pulse, but unnecessary development and greed have been really present in Puerto Rico. And to me, if I would want to resume that, that is in the last like green space that really caters to hikers, surfers, mountain bikers, horseback riders, a community called Playuela, and beachgoers themselves. So I think the whole community is backing to protect this land. Half of the land that was designated is protected by federal law and a deed, and it's managed by Recreation and Sport Department for Puerto Rico, but half of it is endangered because it is still private and privately owned. Protests happen frequently, and legally what's stopped that whole area from getting developed is the community, architectural findings, wildlife. It's a watershed, so there's a lot of natural resources that are going to be endangered, and it's just an endless fight that we keep trying to be part of.
I found this to be a really interesting part of the story, that it was indigenous Taino artifacts that ended up really sealing the deal in terms of protection of that land. Is that true? I feel like that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think Kathy Hall was the one that really stamped that, and I think that was a culprit of why that land hasn't been developed, and there's no structures there to this day because there's Taino Indian findings, and there's a lot of wildlife coexist in there. And beautifully enough, it's become the safest camping ground for surf goers and other people alike. So, I mean, it's a very beautiful place. And to us surfers, it's magical because it's that west side where the trade winds blow offshore, 200 days out of the year. And that's where we surf, our kids surf. It's just these magical greenlands with palm trees that are breathtaking. And it would be really sad to see concrete and jetties and all that stuff that they threaten to put there.
This might be a stupid question, but is the Taino culture still existing?
I don't think it is. I think it was wiped out. I mean, we're all at heart, I think we're all defending them, but I look at my family tree, I'm Spanish, Italian, and pirate. So I think the Taino culture, if I'm not mistaken, got decimated by disease and conquerors and all that. There's a rich African culture in this island. There's a rich kind of more indigenous culture. There's a mixed bag of beautiful people that live amongst the trees in this island. And I think they come from all corners of the world. But unfortunately, I think our Tainos and our beautiful Indian culture or native culture doesn't exist. Don't quote me on that because that's not a professional answer, but that's how I've been educated for the lifetime that I've been here.
Yeah.
So we were just there with you, Otto, and it was, for me, just so special to be back on that island. It had been around 20 years since I'd been back there. And one of the things that really struck me was the sazon, the spice, the flavor, the enthusiasm, just the sort of like open enthusiasm, the overt enthusiasm. I feel like when we came back to Australia, it's a lot more subdued here, that sort of overt energy. But I really loved that feeling on your home island there of people just not being scared to show their passion for something, whether it be food or dancing or surfing, soccer, whatever it is, just this spice, this flavor there. And I wasn't surprised when we picked up the phone and started talking to you now to hear that you, since we've been there, have done nothing but surf all day, family all evening, and then work the next day, and then family in the afternoon, and then soccer, and then romance time, and then surfing again. And it's just like, just full tilt energy, right? And I feel like after a week of being there, I need to like come home and sleep and hide from the sun for about a month. And the thought of you continuing at that pace since then just is incredible to me. Can you speak to that? Like, what is the deal? How are you doing that?
So I keep trying to explain people that there's some flavor. We have some stuff in our blood. It's like almost like we have spice.
We have some stuff in our blood. That's great.
And I think it's in everything we do. And when you have the chance as a Puerto Rican to show that energy, that magic, and I'm going to quote you on something that you said when you were here. When you think of something, our goal is to get it as quick as we can, right? And it's not only a Puerto Rican. It's like, I think the island does that itself, right? And maybe you picked a magic moment to come here, which I think you did. But I think I spoke to you about this before too. We radiate off of people's energy. And I think the Puerto Rican always, if you're good to us, we're going to try to be better and better and better. And we want you to not only have the best impression of us, but we we kind of want you to fall in love with us. And that's how the Puerto Rican way is.
That's
You
so
know,
good. Yeah.
that's how the grandma is. That's how the buddy is. It's like, oh, you've never eaten like this before. You've never drank like this before. You've never surfed like this before. And this is the way here, and it's the flavor, it's sazon. It's like it happens in everything we do. I mean, I can't explain it. Like every artist that we have, like if you look culturally what they are, they want to go for broke. And maybe it's a complex. Maybe we're little and we feel big. I don't know what it is, but if you love us, we're gonna love you harder. Like, and
Yeah.
that's the way it rolls here.
It's so true. And I am so stoked that you brought up the manifesting thing, because when we were on the island and we would be talking about something and you'd be like, oh, you wait, don't worry, it's done, it'll happen. And I'd kind of be like, oh yeah, we'll see, in my mind. And then, for example, when we're talking about sprouted coconuts in the morning, that evening, or not even, that lunchtime after surfing all morning and being so blazed by the sun, we stop in to get some food, and lo and behold, here you go. Oh, brother Rasta, here's a sprouted coconut for you. I was like, this is amazing. All right, that happened in just a couple hours. And then we're talking about, how gnarly noni fruit is, and, different medicines you can get from the land, like papaya leaf tea and all this sort of stuff. And then we're like, oh yeah, but I think I draw the line at noni. And then we go to the beach and we're sitting there the next surf session, and the only shade we get on the beach is under a coconut tree. And right next to us is the noni tree. And that just kept happening. The space between thinking something and considering it was so short. And I feel like, yeah, that is also an attribute of your culture and your place that's really special. Really, really special.
Yeah, I think you were open to that too. And I think that has to happen when we're all in synergy, right? And when I'm all about energy. I believe that, like, you think something and you manifest it and it happens. But when you actually think something with your heart in the land of plenty, which through your eyes, I know that I live in the land of plenty. All of a sudden, it was awesome to see that, like, we wanted it so much that it just happened. And I mean, I think it was a special week. The waves did what they had to do. I think it just happened because it was supposed to happen. And if we could live our lives like that every day, it would be awesome, because it's almost like the land gifting you what you're throwing at it. And one other thing that really changed my life, and I mean, I went to Tahiti, back in the day, and had a special connection with the land, but opening myself mentally and physically and spiritually to a place where it has so much energy gave me so much back, that I think that there was some of that. And, for those that are not spiritually or energetically inclined, that's real. And I'm certain about it. And I'll take my next step with that same thought, and hopefully till the day that I die.
Yeah.
Just creating energy, positive energy to make things happen.
Mm.
You spoke about love before, Otto, and energy. Can you tell us your love story with Andrea?
Oh, man. Behind every all right man, there's an incredible woman. I had the pleasure of meeting my lovely wife in the North Shore, probably the hardest place to ever meet a girl in the world. But yeah, it was serendipitous. It was weird. It was meant to be. And I actually met my wife a year before we even thought about being together, and we had coffee. And I remember telling my landlord that I would marry this girl any day if it was ever a possibility. Back to the energy, I guess I ended up marrying her. I guess I ended up going for that. Funny enough, a year later, my partner and I see each other in a party at Chris Malloy's house, and with a really good friend, mutual friend of ours, Scott Sowens, who actually made me go out that night. Thank you, Scott. Yeah, I just knew it. I was like, I was actually dating another girl that night and saw my wife, and I'd say, I'm sorry, I'd drop this broad any day for that girl. So I was clearly in love with my wife way before she was in love with me. And the day after, Scott literally told me, hey, we got to go out. And I go, I have this rule. I don't go out. I had a good time last night. I don't do 2 nights in a row. He said, no, you're my wingman. You got to come. And I was like, oh, okay, code is code. I got to go with my boy. And yeah, Andrea and I have never left each other ever since. It's been really cool. We spend a lot of time in Hawaii. We have a beautiful crew of friends there that, you know, we share friendships with, like the Holmesies, and yeah, it's just Hawaii was a place that really touched me, and I was obsessed with Pipeline, and I think Pipeline gifted me Andrea, and I don't know, it's a fake story that came true. I mean, if I were to tell that story, it could be, yeah, it was awesome. And to be honest, Andrea's the calm to my right. Obviously, you know, Puerto Ricans are loud and proud and doers and all that. And Andrea's the even keel, and she's amazing. She's actually an environmental scientist. A lot of the things that I do have a lot to do with her feedback, and you know, and she's the expert and I'm just the executor. So like I said, behind every all right man, there's a way better woman. And I don't know, Andrea's the pillar. She's mom. Her and I have two beautiful kids, Maceo and Bo. Maceo probably the manager of the house, one of the most beautiful men I've ever met. And Bo's got sazon. Bo's just a full on riot. And yeah, we have fun. We found a little corner in the world that we called home, and we have a lot of fun amongst the trees and the palm trees and the coconuts. And this, yeah, it's a cool place. It's a rad place. Yeah.
Yeah.
On our last evening in Puerto Rico together, we got to sit beneath a big coconut tree, and the stars were coming out, and there were margaritas in hand. And I watched Davey, you sit down with Maceo on a little chair off to the side and dive into conversation. And I saw how moved you were and are by his sweetness. And Otto, I wanted to ask you about Maceo in particular because your experience with managing diabetes. We have diabetics in our lives, and they are some of the tenderest, most compassionate people that we know.
Yeah, Maceo is incredible. And he got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 5 years old. And basically he's an old soul. He's learned to manage his diabetes. He's learned to live with this thing that I guess he doesn't deserve. Yeah, he's incredible. He's just a good person. But what I like about Maceo is that he's true, he's loving, and he's just amazing.
Yeah. Oh, he floored me the night when we left. I was really just humbled by his way of communicating too, you know, like we never hung out before, but he was just telling me how much he loves his family, how much he loves just his life. He'd surfed, I think, perhaps 3 sessions that day, so he had a quiet surfing day for you guys, I guess. But he was, he was just full of energy, but in a calm way. And I don't know, I just felt really honored to meet him, actually. It was just like, you're just a really honorable young fella. And, he was such a great communicator for someone that age. And that's, real testament to you all. And you can see how much love he feels from his family and his community. And that was also one thing that night that just felt so great, is that we all had these free-range children like playing hide and seek under cars in a car park, around the back of a barbed wire fence and down a rocky embankment to the ocean. And none of us were freaking out. No one was helicoptering those kids. They were just having a blast, and our little boy Minnow was looped into that group. And it was just a really refreshing space to be in, and it felt like all the uncles and aunties that were around were also the co-parents of the children in that space. And just that was just so healthy, man. I'm so grateful that you all have that way about you, and that for us and for Minnow, especially our little 7-year-old, to feel that was really special.
A real community.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really important for me because I actually had a really good connection, since I met him. I remember a couple of years ago when you and I were in Santa Barbara, and we had that, I think it was an ambassador meeting, and I remember telling you that Maceo was the most beautiful man in the world, and you were like, whoa. And for you to experience that on your own and in your own time is really cool. And he wanted to talk to you. He was like, I want to talk to Uncle Dave and I want to spend some time and I want to sit him down yeah, it's really hard to describe Maceo. He's genuine. He's his own person, and he really loves his life and he cares about everybody. Our culture has been mixed with a Hawaiian culture in terms of the uncles, but we in Puerto Rico and in Latin America, a tío is an uncle, and it's basically the same thing than in Hawaii, but with a little more sazon and with a little less like, and I don't mean it in a bad way, with a little less aloha and a little more roughness, you know, a little more grit. One thing that I really loved about it that night that we spent, you know, hanging out with our friends, and was seeing you guys connect freely with everybody, and like nobody really tried. It just happened. But also when I looked down at the kids with a fisherman grabbing fish and all that, and all of us it was normal, and it's normal. And to me, it's very important to give them the opportunity to be themselves, you know, and yeah, we care about them and all that. But I was brought up, with messed up, like, you know, I grinded knees and feet, like, and that kind of made me who I am. So I have to give them the opportunity to get dirty and get work in the surf and all that. And obviously we're watching over him. We do the best to educate them, but we also got to give them that freedom and that roaming possibility for them to be themselves. And I think they embrace that. We just had a WSL contest here, and a lot of our friends' kids are coming to surf these contests, and I'm getting phone calls from parents. You know, Peter Mendia's kid is surfing a slab with me, and I'm talking to Peter Mendia, going like, "Hey, Kepa's coming to surf with me, and you know, I'm gonna go take him here." And obviously, Dad has surfed the slab with me before, but it's really cool. And then Corey Lopez with his kids, and just to be a part of that, and just to see that, and to see our offsprings just live the life that they can design is really cool. And to me, the beautiful thing that has happened is, and this is how I built my lifestyle and my career, is that I've never wanted to be a world champion, or I've never wanted to be this. I just wanted to design exactly what I wanted to do with surfing, and I keep doing it. It just keeps happening, and it's just and it's awesome. And at 49, I surf more than ever. Yeah, I work and I have businesses, and I have a lot more to do with my community, but yeah, I'm still designing how I want to surf and how I want to be in the ocean and how I want to get back.
Yeah, wonderful.
That's pretty cool.
Well, it's probably a great place to wrap, though I want to go back to just that story that Mace told me that night about during one of his many hours in the water that day, he had 2 packs of gummies on him so that if he has a sugar low, he can, you know, pound the sugars and keep surfing. He doesn't have to come to shore and stuff. But he got pounded and lost some of those. And then I think he just continued surfing anyway. But then when the surf session ended, he came in with Magnus's daughter, Shakti. And he came in with Shakti, and they're walking along the shoreline long after he'd been blasted and lost those sugars, and up with the whitewater to their feet washes those gummies. And he's like, there you go. The ocean's like saying sorry, or saying, here you go, I pounded you, but not too much. I will look after you. And it was so neat to see his eyes light up about that and that feeling. And I don't know, that's just like one of those little many moments of magic that were there with you all. And like you said, you have designed, you have cultivated, you have grown that kind of life, and you've made a space foster those sort of moments. And then you've also instilled that in your children, the two of you, Andrea and yourself, so that moments of magic can happen like that, and that they are paying enough attention to see them happen, and then appreciate them, and then even remember them and tell them in a great story to an uncle from the other side of the world. It's just great.
Yeah, man, I got to say that, yeah, the ocean has given us so much, that all the energy that we give back to it, and all this stuff. I mean, I think that's definitely my goal, is to return as much as I can to the ocean, because it's just given me such a beautiful life. And not to sound weird or anything, but if I die tomorrow, just laugh because we had such a good time, it's so fun. It's all because of the ocean. I mean, it was there when I was young, when I was with that bodyboard. It was there for the trials. It was there for the tribulations. It was everywhere. Yeah, I guess I owe it all to the ocean because it's just brought me so much love. And it's brought me one thing that's really important to me, and it's the family of surfing. And I have people all around the world, and I could say that freely without any hiccups. And that's the most important thing, to just be able to go somewhere and not even know anybody and still have family, because of this community, this culture, this wave sliding thing that we have done, and the waves we just play in the ocean. It's the biggest playground in the world, so it's worth protecting.
Thanks for listening with us today. If you like what you heard, please consider sharing an episode with a friend. Our editor this season is the multi-talented, absolute legend, Ben Jake Alexander. The soundtrack was composed by Shannon Soul Carroll, with additional tunes by Dave and Ben. We have a few new Water People experiments this season. You can find every episode of the podcast on our Water People YouTube page, or subscribe to our very infrequent newsletter to get book recommendations, questions we're pondering, and behind-the-scenes glimpses into recording the podcast and more via our website, waterpeoplepodcast.com. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcast.